Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is the News Brief Special. Today we're going to be talking about Zelensky's interview with Lex Fridman. Surprise, surprise, I'm sure you knew I would be doing this. So anyways, we're going to be doing it together so you don't have to suffer through this thing alone, and I don't have to suffer through this thing alone. And of course, as per usual, leave your comments, questions, and suggestions down below so we can discuss it together. Let's go. Well, I want to start with telling you why this interview is so important and why it was such a big and long-awaited one. First of all, Lex Fridman is a character. He is a very popular YouTuber with millions and millions of people in his audience, but he is a far-right YouTuber who preaches the values of a nuclear family, anti-LGBTQ rights, and of course he loves Donald Trump and his cronies. And he's also quite pro-Russian, which it doesn't help that his roots are actually Russian. Yeah, sure, his parents are from Ukraine or maybe lived in Ukraine for a little bit, but he was born and raised in Moscow, or rather he was born in Uzbekistan and raised in Moscow. So he was raised with the values of the great Russian ballet, amazing Russian culture, and he lives and exists in that environment, so that's his bias. His channel is known for, spreading rhetoric that matches Russian propaganda, and so his viewers, which are in the millions, are usually Americans and are usually the type of Americans who sympathize with Russia more and are quite anti-Ukrainian. So getting this interview and getting on that platform and having those ears that Zelensky otherwise would not have been able to engage is huge and crucial. Very crucial. So the topic of this conversation was obviously Russia's aggression against Ukraine, or more so, the war in Ukraine, because that's the kind of, theme that his audience is more comfortable with. And I think the idea of this interview that Lex Fridman was going into it with was to sort of continue spreading his biases and his narratives, because he did not expect the interview to go the way that it did, which it blew up the internet, made Lex Fridman look kind of ignorant, kind of silly, very unprepared, and made Zelensky look incredible, and really did get through to a lot of people. Lex Fridman did go to Ukraine before. He went to Ukraine in the beginning of the full-scale invasion, and he himself said that he's recorded a ton of interviews out east, and then he decided not to release them. Why? Well, because likely that would go against his pro-Russian narrative. So the expectation of this conversation was maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours. It was a 3-hour conversation, and again, Zelensky blew it out of the water. And there were obviously two types of reactions, the reaction from foreigners and the reaction from Ukrainians. And the things that have been floating around the Ukrainian internet and going viral was Zelensky cursing. And hey, obviously, a leader of a country cursing on an official interview or an interview on a podcast is quite a big deal, but the reason why it's such a big deal is because of the types of curses that he chose, which really show how little patience he has left for very, very ignorant questions and for having to explain these very emotional things on repeat to someone who seems like a wall that doesn't understand them. So in Ukraine, we have three tiers of curses. What do I mean by that? Well, there are curses that you could technically use in front of your parents. Then there are curses that you could potentially get in trouble for using in front of your parents. And then you will definitely get in trouble in front of your parents. So these curses are basically the same curse. They mean the same thing, but they have different suffixes. So you could do poфиг, which means doesn't give a shit, but in a mild form. You could do похер, which is doesn't give a shit, in a medium form. And then you could do похуй, which is doesn't give a shit in a very, very extreme form. Like, this is the type of stuff your parents would probably ground you for like a month for. And Zelensky used the third tier, the most egregiously extreme tier of cursing, which demonstrates how tired he is of the world not understanding his messaging. So let's get to this messaging.
Ні, чому? Да похеру. Це ж зрозуміло російською, правильно? От як російською було похеру, так і всім іншим гарантерам безпеки Будапештського мира. Всім було похеру на цю страну, на цих людей.
I've seen a lot of comments saying that Lex Fridman looks unprepared and he looks like a 5-year-old child just not understanding why unicorns don't exist. And the 3 hours are Zelensky explaining, like to a 5-year-old, why unicorns don't exist. So some of the most popular subjects were obviously the same questions that the people that tend to support Russia always ask, and I guess don't necessarily get the answers that would resonate with them. But in this particular interview, they got the answers that resonated with them. And the reason why this conversation was so important is because maybe, you know, if it was with someone pro-Ukrainian, or if it was addressed to the audience that's pro-Ukrainian, these questions would never be asked, because they're the types of questions that I guess if you're interested in Ukraine, you support Ukraine, you would already know the answers to. The prevailing theme of this interview was that Lex Fridman wanted to know why Zelensky would not want to be sitting at the negotiations table with Putin. And I think he did the most brilliant job explaining why he wouldn't.
I'm sorry. With all due respect, it's naive to think he wants to finish the war.
What I would want, I do have what some might call a naive dream of you sitting down with Putin and Trump and negotiating a deal about a ceasefire and together finding a path to long-term peace. And I think this requires strength, requires negotiations. There are a lot of carrots and sticks here that can be used to make a real deal. And Trump is very keen on making a deal and ready to negotiate.
Can I ask you a question? Yep. President Trump will be in the same situation as I was in 2019. Precisely the same situation. I want to end the war. We want a lasting peace for Ukraine. We must do this: the ceasefire, exchange people, and then diplomatically return all territories. And we will do this through diplomacy. What will happen next with President Trump? If the ceasefire happens without security guarantees, at least for the territory we control, what does he get? If he manages to make a ceasefire deal, and 3 months later, Putin launches a new wave of attacks.
Then the next theme was, hey, let's start this interview in Russian because I speak Russian and you speak Russian, and this is the language we're both freely able to express ourselves in. So again, here is the reasoning that Zelensky gave in terms of why he's not going to be speaking Russian. And, you know, it was very ignorant to expect a person during the full-scale invasion in a war for survival speaking Russian. But the reason why this question and this suggestion was so important is because it gave an avenue to Zelensky to explain to all of those people who don't get it why Ukrainians are not going to be speaking Russian.
If we speak in Russian.
I speak Russian perfectly, of course, and I understand everything you are talking about. However, I can't respond in Russian the entire interview. It's because this is how it is today. I am not making anything up. You can see it all for yourself. You can feel and hear it. Today, there were 73 missile attacks against us, and people were killed. There were over 100 drones today, and this is a daily occurrence. The people who attack us, they speak Russian. They attack people who were only recently told that this was actually in defense of Russian-speaking people. And this is why I respect neither the leader or director of today's Russia, nor the people. That's it. And I don't think that you can just pretend that nothing's happening and give Putin a pass once again for saying that we are one people, that we speak one language, etc. They speak the language of weapons. That is a fact. And we are peaceful people who want to protect themselves and defend their freedom and their human choice. You know, at the beginning of the war, I addressed Russians in Russian. Zero effect. They're mute. They do not listen. They did not listen. Some are afraid. Some have other issues. They have different reasons. It's like when a person is drowning, and people walk by because they can't hear them. And someone walks on by crying, afraid to save them. It doesn't change anything for the one drowning. They need someone to help them. This is why I honestly despise these people, as they are deaf. They began the occupation in the supposed defense of the Russian language. And that's why, with all due respect, I would like to give an interview in Ukrainian. This is very important to me. If there are some points that you want me to explain in Russian, I can certainly do that. I can certainly occasionally speak Russian. But in general, no.
But also, the interesting thing here is that Lex Fridman doesn't speak Russian well himself, and Zelensky actually called him out on it because, yeah, sure, Fridman is from a Russian-speaking family, but he's a lot more fluent in English. So this odd comment about speaking Russian was not really motivated by the fact that this is the only language they can understand each other totally in. It was motivated more so at forcing Zelensky to speak Russian, right? Because why not? So I'm going to play you some of the excerpts from this interview that I thought were the most important ones, and we're going to go over them.
Well, when you come and visit me in Texas as a guest for the third time,
With pleasure.
let's do this. How about you, my friend Joe Rogan, and I will go get some Texas barbecue together?
Who will pay?
That's a good question.
Putin. For everything. I only asked for two things. Send us weapons, or better yet, strengthen us with preventive measures so there would be no war. It wasn't the weapons that I was asking for. I asked for sanctions. Intimidate him. Please don't say that. If he comes, if he crosses borders, if he kills, we're imposing sanctions. Well, this is complete bullshit. Sorry, but really?
Oh, I understand this.
Oh, wonderful. Yes.
I understood one word.
Yeah.
So they did not help.
I believe that no, and this is a fact. We didn't receive help. If we assume that words are help, well, then yes, we received a lot of it because there were plenty of words regarding the ceasefire. Well, they started killing us in about a month, so I called him and I told him, we agreed on a ceasefire, didn't we? Well, it wasn't a piece of toilet paper, was it? This is serious business. Or so it seemed. It really was serious. Merkel, Macron, you and I, we all agreed on this together. A ceasefire is important, isn't it? Not for New Year's, because everyone was celebrating New Year's. And now they're offering us a Christmas ceasefire. It's all the same. A ceasefire for 2-3 days just to get some praise. But this isn't a performance. This isn't some kind of theater. No, this is about people's lives. And that's what happened. After that, I called him a few more times. I think I only had 2-3 calls with him in total. I asked him for a ceasefire. He told me it couldn't be. We will figure it out now. People from the occupied territory, Russians and separatists, they were all there together. They continued to shoot and kill our people. Yes, the front lines were quiet, but they killed people. They were killing people, and I kept calling him. I called again and again, but there was nothing. Until, after a few months, the Russians stopped answering the phone.
Yes,
Who are
destructive
you?
military
Who are
actions.
you talking about now? Who loves his country?
Putin. Do you think he doesn't love his country?
No. What is his country? He happened to consider Ukraine his country. What is his country? Explain it. Tomorrow he will say that it's America. No pity for the Chechens? Do they look like Russians? Do they speak Russian? Of course. Of course they learn in schools like anywhere there's been Russification. Who are the Chechens? A different people. Another faith, other people, another language, a million. Eliminated. And eliminated how? How did he kill them? With love? I know, fuck. By hugging. In Ukrainian, as we say, strangling by hugging. I love you so, so much. I love you so much that I want to kill you. That's his love. And that's not love. You're mistaken. He does not love his people. He loves his inner circle. It's only a small part of the people. He doesn't love them. Why? I'll explain. You cannot send your people to another land to die, knowing that they will die. Children, my daughter, she is 20 years old. For me, this is a child. She is already an adult, of course. But she is a child. The boys he sends are 18 years old. 18 years old. They are children. He sends them. It's not that fascists came to his land and he needs to defend it. He came to ours and he sent them. Chechnya, he sent them. Syria, he sent them. Africa, he sent them. Georgia, he sent them. Moldova, Transnistria, that was before him. Fine, we can leave that aside. He has enough sins of his own. And then there's Ukraine, the largest part. 780,000. 788,000 killed or wounded Russians. He calls them all Russians, even those who don't know how to speak Russian. On his territory of Russia, everything they've enslaved. Yes, proud Varangians. So I wonder, is that love? What love is this? And for what? Does he love his people? No. Does he love his land? His country is bigger than America. How much land do you need? America is huge. America is simply an outstanding country. Outstanding country. Russia is bigger. Well, just bigger. So ask yourself, does he love them? What is he doing? And what does he love? Do you think he's been everywhere in his Russia? It's impossible to get around it.
I understand, but unfortunately, the reality is that a compromise is needed in order to reach an agreement.
In your understanding, the fact that he is in jailed after all the murders, he is not in jailed assuming all the murders, and no one in the world is able to put him in his place, send him to prison. Do you think this is a small compromise?
This is not a small compromise, and to forgive him will not be a small compromise.
To forgive, no one will forgive. This is absolutely impossible to forgive him. We cannot get into the head and soul of a person who lost their family. Nobody never will accept this. Absolutely impossible. I don't know, do you have children?
No, not yet,
Okay.
But I would like to.
Yes. God bless. And this is the most important thing in life. And they simply took away the most precious thing from you, will you ask? Who ruined your life before going to rip their head off? I'm just curious. They took your child away. Are you going to ask who did this? And they will answer that dude did this. You will say, oh, well, then there are no questions. No, you will go fucking hell and bite their head off. And it will be fair. If you say there is a risk that President Trump, will withdraw from NATO, for example, this is a decision of the United States. I'm simply saying that if it does, Putin will destroy Europe. Calculate the size of army in Europe. It's just that I say it for a reason. Do the calculation. Why did Hitler conquer all of Europe then? Almost. Just count, remember, his armies of millions. Calculate what Europe has. What are the largest armies? We have the largest army. The Ukrainian army is the largest in Europe. The second place after us is 4 times smaller than us.
France.
Yes. 200,000? I think the French have about 200,000. We have 980.
So this powerful coalition of European nations
That will not be enough.
is really in power. So let me ask, is someone controlling you? For example, oligarchs, American politicians, Yermak, I wanted to bring this up because I have been here in Ukraine twice since the invasion of 2022. And one of the things I've learned, is that actually nobody controls you. And this is one of your strengths as a president, as a person, that oligarchs and other rich and powerful people like that cannot control you. Can you explain why that is, how you see it?
I think, and it is indeed true, that I'm generally difficult to deal with. I am an ambitious person. I can't submit to anyone. I can live by rules, by laws. I believe that this is the only thing that can control any person today. These are the rules and laws of the society or state where you live. And I believe that this is the most important thing. There's no person who could control me. As I once told President Trump, when we had a meeting, by the way, journalists asked if Trump influenced me during the phone call. I told the journalist the truth then. Who can influence me? Only my boy, my son. This is a fact. When he calls asking for something, well, then I lift up my arms. Yes, and I cannot do anything about it because children are children. I have so little time with them. And therefore, when there are these moments, they are precious and important to me. I am ready to do anything. Also, probably my parents.
I don't even know, honestly, if we need a lot of commentary to this, because Zelensky did such a good job explaining everything that every Ukrainian has been saying and wanted to say, and he has really, really addressed and kind of embodied the mood of every Ukrainian person. And he did so with incredible humility, with no arrogance, and so patiently. And I want to say, I do this every day, right? A lot of these questions that Lex Fridman asks are a lot of the times very disingenuous. But in this particular interview, he genuinely does think that way. He does think in the imperialistic Russia way, where he thinks that Putin has good intentions, right? Or he wants you to think that Putin has good intentions. And Zelensky just broke those glass houses so eloquently. Now, the reason why the Ukrainian internet is so proud of this interview is because you guys all think that Zelensky is a fantastic speaker. Well, in Ukraine, we beg to differ a little bit. We think that he's a fantastic speaker for speeches, as in he's really good at delivering these big emotional scripted speeches, but we don't necessarily find him to be a very strong interviewee. And this interview, being unscripted, was so incredibly good and showed how deeply he understands the history, everything that Ukrainians are going through, because the way that he was answering these questions is the way that the Ukrainian nation wants to answer these questions. Sometimes we lose our temper and we want to curse at a question that's so stupid and so silly and so ignorant that we just want to answer it in oh my God, this is bullshit. And it's bullshit. But then you have to say that, and then you have to still explain it to the person in a way that they understand that it's bullshit. So I think this interview was incredibly well done because it really captured the mood of all the Ukrainian people and what we're going through and what we sometimes want to say to people. And then, of course, the Americans and the rest of the world that's actually so incredibly, usually is very anti-Ukrainian, has left me kind of speechless because their reaction was something that, we could hope for, but never really expected. So I'm going to go over some of the comments under Lex Fridman's YouTube video and tell you why they are. And I think you will grasp the mood and you will grasp how much this interview has done for Ukrainians and for the world understanding what Ukraine is going through.
Did Lex seriously just go to the president of Ukraine and tell him that Putin loves Russia?
Which also, I think this particular comment requires its own excerpt from the interview where Zelensky explains why Putin doesn't love Russia. A lot of people like Russia or support Russia because they think it's a strong country where their leader really loves the country and loves his people. And Zelensky breaks that myth so well.
Holy fuck. I listened to way too much before I realized Lex was just gonna keep saying the same shit. But have you tried peace? Come on, dude.
Good luck with the Putin interview, which obviously is a running joke that he's also going to interview Putin after this. But the reason why I picked out this comment is because I think that the prevailing theme of this interview is Zelensky explaining everything so well that most of the world got it, and Lex Fridman sitting there and continuing pushing like the pre-written questions and the pre-written like preconceived notions that he had, which just sort of really shows how much on different pages they are and how much they live in two different worlds, where Zelensky explains with such grace and elegance why, peace is not going to work. And it's not because of him, it's because of Putin, and it's because of everything that he has done, and because he's not interested in peace. And Lex is like, well, but I would still love to see peace. And Zelensky's like, well, I mean, it's impossible because of A, B, and C. And he's like, yeah, but I have a dream of peace. And he's like, okay, well, I do too, but it's impossible because A, B, and C. And he's like, yeah, but peace though. So it just really shows how much they're like existing in two parallel dimensions, right? And I guess that this is also a lot of the people that this interview was able to get through to, they were existing in a parallel dimension with Zelensky. And now finally through this interview, they were able to get on the same page as him.
Incredible interview, and such rare access to a sitting leader during wartime. While it can be said that to have such a naive interviewer is what put Zelensky at ease and led to him to speak so frankly. It is too often difficult to listen to Lex repeat his nonsensical points and redundant proclamations for a dream. Zelensky shows the maturity and kindness of a father trying to explain reality to a teenager. In that sense, it is a PR masterstroke, as it is the way the West needs to see him. He has done the Ukrainian people justice, as he has so many times before. May he remain safe to the very end of this conflict.
Again, this kind of embodies the vibe that this podcast has demonstrated and why people are taking it the way that they are and why it is such a success for Ukraine and for Zelensky. I also want to point out that, a lot of Ukrainians before this podcast was airing were very against this interview. I mean, I wasn't, because I understand the PR move. Do I like Lex Fridman? Do I think that he should be allowed on the territory of Ukraine, provided how much Russian propaganda he has aired on his podcast? No. Do I understand why it's important for Zelensky to be on his podcast and capture his audience? Absolutely yes. So I was not against this interview. In fact, I was hoping that it would go the way that it did, right? But the chances of that were not very high. And this interview was supposed to air on Monday in the evening, which was yesterday for me. And it ended up dropping on the president's channel before Lex Fridman's channel, and it ended up dropping on Sunday. And I will tell you that likely the reason why that happened is because the presidential office did not want to risk Lex Fridman cutting the interview the way that he would like it in order to make it seem like something that it wasn't. So they released the full interview before he did. And I think it's brilliant. I mean, that's just a theory. I don't know why they released it earlier, but that's what it seems like to me, because that's the concern that a lot of Ukrainian people had, that no matter what Zelensky says, Lex is just going to cut it to make him look bad.
The problem all over the world is that most people have strong opinions but are extremely uneducated about the subject of their opinion and do not care to find out more.
And that's a dig at Lex Fridman, because he went on to interview the president of a country that is being invaded, having all of these preconceived notions that are not backed in any fact, right? And a lot of people that support Russia in this invasion are only supporting Russia because they don't know enough and they don't care to learn enough. And I think that this comment also explains how we got to where we are.
Lex shows his true color and principles in this terrible interview. He did not listen at all. He never once responded to anything President Zelensky said. Not once. He just went to his pre-selected questions, ignoring what the guest wanted to say. So, glad I've unsubscribed from this clown, working his own agenda, wanting only clicks and views.
And this comment is one out of many. There are lots of comments very similar to that. Like, there was a comment saying that, they went into this interview like loving Lex Fridman and being quite of a negative opinion of Zelensky. And they came out of this interview realizing that Zelensky is just a man in a very impossible situation, trying to do the best that he can to save his country. And I think this is an interesting point, right? Is that a lot of these people went to watch this interview thinking that Lex Fridman was going to completely and utterly shatter everything that Zelensky has to say and show to him why he is wrong. Meanwhile, this interview ended up being Lex Fridman being kind of condescending in a way that he just consistently kept not understanding anything that was being said to him. But when I say that, I mean that everyone else who's watched this interview understands it, because it was chewed up for him, right? Chewed out for him. And I think that the difficult part of watching this interview is just how much Lex Fridman doesn't want to see Zelensky's point and how much he's still trying to push his preconceived propaganda notions about Russia, the greatness of Russia, Putin, and the point of this invasion. However, what Lex Fridman doesn't realize he did with this interview by showing himself as so unprepared and as such a sort of, I don't know, contrary, as such a negative character and asking these very silly questions that no one really should be asking in 2025, he opened the road for Zelensky to communicate with the people that also have this opinion, that also think this way. And Lex didn't do it on purpose. Obviously, he wasn't asking these stupid questions or, consistently trying to tell Zelensky to try peace and forgive Russia and love Putin and love Musk and love Trump, because he was trying to show him the side of the audience that thinks that way. It's just because he is that ignorant and that silly. But that was fantastic and a fantastic opportunity for Zelensky to reach the people that also think that way. Because no serious journalists would be asking, Zelensky, a leader of a country at war for the past 3 years, these silly, silly questions. Because no one should, right? But I guess this is the difference between how Russian propaganda works and how Ukrainian outreach works. We target academia, as in you already have to have a pretty good knowledge of this situation and history of Europe, and you need to follow the news to understand what we're talking about, because at this point it's been so long and it's been covered so much that it almost feels impossible that you have to explain it to people. But Russia has a different approach. They explain it in layman's terms to a 5-year-old every single time, except everything they explain is a lie. And I think that what Ukraine can take out of this interview and of how incredibly accessible and incredibly useful and incredibly convincing it was, is that we need to reach the masses. And even if these messages are things that we consider to be so overplayed and we can't believe that someone's asking these questions this far into this invasion, we still need to be talking to everyone like they're 5 years old and explaining these things like they're 5 years old, because the majority of people simply lack enough knowledge about this situation. Because, why wouldn't they, right? A lot of people just don't bother checking it out, and they exist in their information bubble, and they exist in what Twitter and other social media networks send to them about this situation and about this war. They don't research it themselves. They will see an article somewhere, they'll interact with it, and now all of the articles suddenly are going to be pro-Russian, and they're not going to go out of their comfort zone to look for something that changes their mind. So this, I think, was a colossal success for Zelensky and a colossal failure for Lex Fridman. And he ended up making history with this interview, kind of unplanned and without putting any effort into actually making this interview as good as it was, because by being so ignorant and by being so silly, he allowed Zelensky the opportunity to be humble, educational, and to really break barriers in communication with a lot of the Western audiences. I think that it's crazy to me, that I've been researching the reactions to this interview, and they're fantastic on both sides, both in Ukraine and both in the world. I have a very hard time finding bad comments from anyone really under these interviews, and the only kind of bad things that I found about this interview was Candace Owens calling Zelensky a Nazi who is exterminating Ukrainian Christians, which lady, you really need some mental health help, genuinely. And then the second one was Russian bots under the video, obviously expected. And then also, there were some comments from Russians who said, who because of this excerpt that Zelensky said, were very mad at him and said that they lost all of their respect to him because he is equating all of the population of Russia to the actions of the dictator. Well, I mean, if you watch this entire interview and you still think that he cares for Russians respecting him, then you really have no comprehension skills. And I think he's explained so well why neither he nor we care about it. And secondly, yes, you can equate the entirety of the population to the actions of the dictator because it's been 3 years and Russians that stayed in Russia are quite happy with what's happening. And Russians that left Russia, well, you left because you didn't want to get hurt. You were scared of getting hurt, right? But if instead of running, all of you came out and protested this invasion, then you could have stopped it. Yes, sure, you would have gotten hurt, but that's the whole point. It's easier for you to watch us get killed than to potentially get hurt by the police or riot police or something, right? So it's easier to run away and let us continuously get murdered instead of doing something against it and then be upset that we're not praising you for it. So yeah, I think that this interview accomplished more than anyone could ever expect it to, because everything I'm seeing online is just very, very positive reviews of this interview and people getting it. People who didn't get it before really, really getting it. And I think that the sort of support for Ukraine and the way that people are perceiving this situation is really going to change after this interview. And I think that Zelensky might go on some other podcasts that have audiences that wouldn't have listened to him priorly. I think that a lot of Ukrainian YouTubers and journalists are going to get a bunch of new audiences and a bunch of new people interested in Ukraine. And I think that this has accomplished more than we ever have expected it to. And I think the one thing that did happen here that was the most unexpected is I think Lex Fridman was going into this interview thinking that this interview with Zelensky is just going to support his Russian narrative. And it turned out to do absolutely the opposite, because that's what happens when you don't know what you're talking about and the person you're interviewing does. Lex bit off more than he could chew, and now his little, Russian favoring narrative crystal castle is crumbling. And I'm so glad that this interview happened the way that it did, and I'm so proud of Zelensky for how he handled it. And that's all I have for you for today. If you enjoyed this special type of brief and you would like to see more like it, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel and turn on all of your notifications. Also, don't forget to like this video and send it to a friend so they can get educated as well. And of course, as per usual, please leave your questions, comments, and suggestions down below because I read all of them and they help me greatly to understand what you are interested in. Till next time.